Auto-GPT is really the next step in this crazy journey of AI revolution. And what it presents is a autonomous AI, which is able to do a recurring task to complete the objective you provided. Well, in this video, we're going to be going over the detailed Python code and looking at the secret sauce behind what makes this code really possible. Now, as a disclaimer, if you don't know coding, this is probably not the video for you. But if you do and you want to really get some good details about how they structured the project, the file formats, and really how they chained everything together, then this is the video for you. So before we get started, I do want to add that this project is changing by the day. And as of April 14th at 12 p.m., they actually just pushed a major update that kind of changed a lot of the infrastructure, literally in the middle of, while I was recording this video. So we're going to kind of go through some of those changes as well. But I want to kind of show overall how this application really works. So now everything has been stored in this Auto-GPT folder. That's really where all of the magic happens. And when you run the command, they've updated it now where you're going to run python-m Auto-GPT. And if you have your arguments that you want to put past that, you can put those in there as well. So when you're doing that, it's calling inside of Auto-GPT, it's calling this main.py function. And I kind of broke down all these functions so you can view it. Obviously, the first function that it's calling is this main function right here. This does a quick check to make sure that you have the right keys. And this agent class is very, very important. So essentially, the way that this application works is that it has these instances of a class called agent. And these agents are given their own kind of message history. They're given their own memory limitations, their own names, their prompts, the user input. And that's kind of at the heart of this, is that you kind of have this system that's able to spit out agents. And there's even an agent manager that was recently pushed that will actually manage all of these agents so that you have asynchronized tasks being done. So when it creates this instance of these agents, and we're going to look at the agent class a little bit more in detail, you can see here that there's a start interaction loop. And it's really fascinating because all this code really is just a crazy while loop, okay? So it's just iterating on itself. And you can see that it seems like it's while true, so it's pretty much this while loop is going to run forever unless something breaks the loop. And you can see here that there's continuous modes. So depending on what arguments that you give it, it's going to behave differently. And if you want a list of those arguments, if you go inside of this function, parse arguments, you can actually see all of the arguments that are here. So you have the continuous mode. You have continuous mode with a limitation. So if you want it to end after a certain amount of iterations, you can add an integer value there, enabling speak, enabling debug, GPT-3 only, GPT-4 only, your usage of memory if you want to limit that. So it says define which memory backend to use if you're using Redis or your local cache. You can skip the reprompts. And then you also have additional settings that you can add on here. And that will get saved to the settings.yaml file. Okay, so let's go back to actually analyzing that iteration loop to really get a sense of what it is doing. So if we go back to start iteration loop, you can start seeing that, first of all, it takes the objectives and starts chatting with the AI. And this function right here is just your typical ChatGPT completion function, where it will provide those initial objectives that you provided, and then it will get those thoughts, and it will print out those thoughts with the reasoning and the criticisms. So every action is kind of broken down to having a reasoning, a plan, and a criticism, and also accompanying it with a command. And this is where I think the genius is in this whole repository, is that for us programmers, you know, every time you're writing a piece of code, you're really just chaining a bunch of functions together when you think about it, right? And they adopted that same type of mentality here where they're chaining a bunch of commands, okay? And the way that they're getting those commands is by giving those objectives to GPT-4 and asking it to return the list of commands and arguments that should be done next. And you can see here where it prints those commands that it gets back, okay? And those commands are all defined inside of commands.py. So that's inside of Auto-GPT folder. If you go down here, inside of the execute command function, you'll see all of the arguments listed. So let's kind of break this down. So you have the first one is Google. So this is where it's going to Google, something. It's either going to use the DuckDuckGo, or if you add your Google API key, so you see right here, it says that in line 63, it's going to run a Google official search. You also have the memory add function, so it'll add things to memory. You have the start agent. So we talked about that earlier, where it can create a new class, a new instance of our agent. And then you can see here where it'll define the name, the task, and the prompt of that agent. So it has this kind of asynchronized ability to spin off agents that do other work. You have a message agent, which I haven't played around with too much. You have the list of agents. You can delete an agent. So if an agent's task or objective is done, that'll get deleted out. You also have a get text summary, which it utilizes a lot for, especially when it's browsing a website or it's scraping information. It'll get a summary of that content so it understands what that page is about. You can see here where it's passing that URL, and it passes that argument question, which is one of the parameters. So in the command, it's going to tell it get the summary, and then ChatGPT is also looking at that question, which is an instruction to get the summary, which is it's pretty fascinating. And it's also capable of getting hyperlinks. So when it goes on a website, it's also getting additional hyperlinks, and then it can break down that information. So that's how it's able to kind of have that iterative process where, just like a human being, when we click on a website, we'll click on other links to get additional details. Also, the read file is very important because essentially what it does is it creates its own kind of workspace. So when you run the command, and I can show you here in my terminal, okay, one of the files you'll see here is the Auto-GPT workspace. And if I cd into that repository, folder, you'll see that when I was running it, all of the files, whether they're image generations or text files, seems like those are the two formats that it does. Okay, I don't know what this enter file path name here. It seems like it does glitch out a little bit. It's definitely not perfect, but I'm sure it'll get there pretty soon. So it will create that kind of folder, and it'll even set the permissions. And that's where the commands for reading a file is, writing to a file, appending to a file, deleting a file, searching for a particular file. All of these commands really deal with that workspace so that it's able to grab things from memory and utilize that. And then additionally, you can see more of the browse website. So we talked about that earlier. That's kind of chained in with the Google command. And we have evaluating a code base, improving a code. So this is, if you saw the demonstrations, this is where it's able to improve the code. That's where those commands are. It's able to write its own tests on those commands and execute that Python file, and also execute a shell. This was a newer one that they added in here, but executing its own shell command. You also have the generate image, and then you also have do nothing, and then you have task completed. Okay, so sometimes it does nothing. It kind of has to reanalyze itself. So the creators also thought about that. Okay, the next file I want to talk about that's extremely important is the prompt.py file. And you can see a lot of the different prompts they've given the AI. So again, all the commands are written here, and it also structures it in how the arguments should be broken down. So you can see there's a description, there's the actual key, and then there's the arguments. Okay. And looking at some of the commands is kind of interesting. So around 4,000 word limit for short-term memory. Your short-term memory is short, so immediately save important information to files. If you are unsure how you previously did something or want to recall past events, thinking about similar events will help you remember. No user assistance. Exclusively use the commands listed in the double quotes, e.g. command name. So this is how they were able to ensure that every time they were interacting with GPT-4, it was giving them one of the commands. Because again, that's the secret sauce to all of this, is that if the AI doesn't have a command to do next, and if that's not properly executed, then the program falls apart. So you can kind of see, how, just through the prompt engineering, how they were able to ensure that this was all that is given to the AI to answer. And you can see there's additional things here: internet access for searches and information gathering, kind of telling it about that. Long-term memory management, GPT-3 powered agents for delegation of simpler tasks. And then you can see add performance evaluations to the prompt generator. So this is where it's kind of looking at its performance and analyzing whether or not it's in the right direction, okay? So that you don't get a command or you don't get actions that are irrelevant to the objective. So you can see here it says, continuously review and analyze your actions to ensure you're performing to the best of your abilities. Constructively self-criticize your big picture behavior constantly. Reflect on past decisions and strategies to define your approach. Every command has a cost, so be smart and efficient. Aim to complete tasks in the least number of steps. And you can see that all of that is pretty much a full prompt that is fed back. And if you click here on the usage, you can see where it's calling this. And this is getting called inside of AI config. And AI config is being called inside of your main, okay? So every time that it is, telling you about its thoughts and its reasons and its criticisms, it's really taking that, feeding it back into the AI, given those commands, and then getting another command. And then the while loop continues infinitely until pretty much you have the exit command or the failure command, or, you control C out of here. The next file I want to talk about is the prompt generator file. So this works in tandem with the prompt.py. You can see at line 61, it's calling that. And in here, there are some very interesting parts of this. So first of all, you can see, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, this is the actual compilation of the entire prompt. So you can see how it compiles all the prompts together, where it feeds the constraints like this, the commands, the resources, the performance evaluation, and then also at the end you can see here where it tells it really that it needs a JSON format back. So that's the response type that it requires back. The response format is also very interesting, because if you modify this section, you can actually add more logic to the AI. And then in these other functions, it's really just building up all those commands. It takes the list of the commands we looked at in the prompt and compiles all of those together. And so that's what's getting fed ultimately into the AI. And I also want to go over some of these files that are inside of the Auto-GPT folder. So some of the important ones that I found was browse.py. So this is actually browsing across the internet. So you can see here where it'll check for local file access. It makes sure you're not running, if you're running this on local, behave differently. You can see where it actually makes the request. So it makes sure that this is either HTTP or HTTPS, or it's an invalid URL format. Once it gets that information, it will scrape that text out using Beautiful Soup. And you can see here that it chunks it into a bunch of lines. It creates chunks out of those lines. And then even here, it will extract the hyperlinks in this function here. And so you have your chunks of text and you also have your links. And you can see here that it returns that hyperlink, okay? There's also a formatting of a hyperlink as well to make sure everything is getting formatted accordingly. And then it's more things with splitting the text up. So you can see here where it loops through different paragraphs in those chunks. So like after it gets all of the lines, it puts it in a chunk, then it puts that into a paragraph. And then once it puts it in a paragraph, it will then prompt to summarize that text. So you can see here where it'll take all of those texts and all of those chunks. And what I like about this, and I had written similar code before seeing this, but because of the token limitations, you have to make sure that after you have your paragraphs that you adhere to that token limitation. You can see that this is what they're doing right here, is that they are looking at those chunks and then they're using the create chat completion to summarize each one of those chunks, and then they just append that to the memory. So now they have a chunk of summarizations of that text, which again, because of your token limitation, you can't just throw everything at the AI, right? You have to kind of break down that information into summarizations. And again, like we saw with the prompt, we want to do this with the short amount of tokens as possible because of the cost. So you can see here that they're very cost conscious, and the way they achieved that was by really summarizing all that information. And the summarization text is what is called, where we saw earlier inside of the command, where you can get that text summary. So very interesting about how it's taking all that information from the web and parsing it and utilizing that. Other things that I saw here that were very interesting, obviously you have the image generation side. So it's able to understand when it needs to image generate. So if you see here, once there is an argument to needing to generate an image, that image generation is called, let me actually go back, clicked on the wrong one, right here. So if there is a prompt that is requiring an image to be generated, that image generation is a very simple code, pretty much just using DALL-E. Obviously, if you have the Hugging Face transformer, it'll utilize that down here. So depending on what you set your environment templates, that's going to be very important. And if you don't know about the environment templates, not sure where they added that. Let's see. I saw that yesterday. Oh, it's right there. So you can see here, even they really broke down the environment templates. It was very basic before, but in this last push, it's a lot more updated and a lot more detailed. So this is where you would add that Hugging Face, and you want to make sure that you have this image provider either set to DALL-E or SD. And based on that, it's going to use either tool. Okay, the next file that I want to talk about that's very important is the JSON parser, because in the end of the day, in order for this to work correctly, you need to ensure that parsing the JSON is accurate, and you need to make sure that the AI always spits back that JSON. So if you see here, they kind of give you that JSON schema. So it's always going to return a command. It's going to return those arguments, and then you have the thoughts, right? And you can see here, again, we've seen this earlier. We have your reasoning, you have your plan, short bullet points, your criticisms, and what needs to be said. And one of the things that I saw that was interesting is that there is a catch here, because, and they say it right here in line 45, sometimes GPT responds with something before the braces. And so they're actually able to catch that and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand, please try again, and pass that back into the AI to make sure that it actually returns the JSON every single time. And then they also have this fixed JSON. So just in case there is an ability to fix it, and you can see here where they're almost trying to take out the backticks, because sometimes it's responding with backticks. And I think if you lower your temperature when you're calling, I think this is one thing that probably could be improved in this code, is if they lower the temperature, there won't be as much randomness to these answers. But I mean, I've even seen it not work perfectly when you lower the temperatures. But you can see here where they are fixing or attempting to fix this JSON. And so I think this is still some of the issues that I see with GPT-4 and 3.5, is that there's no way to tell it, like, listen, I need exactly like this. And it'll do it a lot of times, but then there is that 10% of the time where it doesn't give you exactly what you're asking for in that format. So format of JSON is extremely important. If you don't have that in the system, then the system falls apart. It's going to be a lot more work to try to really parse that. And I think they do a pretty decent job. There are improvements I could see here that I've done on my code base to make that a little bit better. But that's essentially the JSON parser. The next file is the speak.py file. This is going to work if you have 11 labs set up. And it's really, really simple. I mean, all it's really doing is just calling the 11 labs API. It stores that file, and then it just opens the file and speaks it out. And you can see here that they have Brian, they have GTS speech. So if you don't have 11 labs, it'll use GTS. I did like that they use this mute X lock to make sure that you don't have kind of a doubling of voices talking at the same time. So that was really good. And then if you're running this on Mac, they will use the good old Samantha voice on here. The classic Mac OS speech bot from, I mean, I think the first time I saw Samantha, I was in middle school, so that was the early 2000s. And so that's a really good thing that they utilized. So if you don't want to sign up for 11 labs and you're running this locally, just use good old Samantha. And then the last file that I'm going to be looking at in this video is the execute code file. So this was the portion of Auto-GPT that would be able to actually evaluate code, fix it, test it. So let's dive into a little bit more details about how they were able to do this. So for the evaluating and writing code, improving code feature, it really breaks down to these three files. So you have a call AI function.py, you have AI functions, and you have execute code, okay? So one thing that was really interesting was that it seems like there has been a repository called AI functions before that was created. And I thought that this part was really quite genius. And if you try this prompt out on ChatGPT, it works very good, where you pretty much tell the AI that you're a Python function, you give it a description of the function, and then you really just give the function name. So like defining the function, the arguments, and what should be returned back. And you can see here it says only respond with your return values, okay? And I tried this out, and it's crazy how well this works. I'm going to show you this right now. Okay, so now I'm in my Easy AI. This is kind of my own ChatGPT. It's going to be released soon for everybody to try out. One of the things that I like on here is that I'm able to put in a more persistent instructions, and I'm able to upload my files. And so you can see here, I actually tried the prompt that they use. So I said, you're a Python function, generate n examples of fake data representing people, each with a name, birthday, and an age. I actually added a birthday. They don't even put a birthday on there just to try this out. And you can see here that it's defining a function called fake people that takes in an integer and spits out a list, a dictionary list, okay? And you can see here it says only respond with your return value. Do not include any other explanatory text in your response. And believe it or not, this thing works amazing. So if I just type in the number 4, okay, you can see here that it literally just returns me back that list of dictionaries, okay? And, you know, like I was saying earlier, sometimes the AI might not be perfect, but it seems like this AI function call, just defining that list, because obviously AI is just a bunch of code, it really understands this part well. And no matter what, I mean, it will spit you out. You put a 100 and it'll spit you back out 100. And so from there, it's able to make sure that you could essentially even build new functions. So as long as you have a description of a function and you know what values it should take and what it should spit out, what the response should be, I mean, you could even essentially update this code where the AI could actually make functions that don't even exist. Which is a really crazy thought. So it's fascinating to see that, okay? And inside of this AI functions file, you can see here where it's able to analyze this code. So again, we see more of this kind of function called analyze code, analyze the given code, and return a list of suggestions for improvements. And you can see here that this is a list of strings, okay? And therefore, if you take a piece of code, if you take a function, and you pass it with these instructions, it will give you back those lists, and those lists can then further be fed into an AI to improve it. So you can see right here, it says a function takes in code and suggests and returns a response from create chat completion API. You can see what the parameters are. So there's the list of suggestions. So now it's taking that evaluation completion response, feeding it into improved code, okay? And now it made a new function called generate improved code, which based on that list of suggestions from your last function, will then spit you out new code. And you can see that it just spits out back a string, because obviously it's just, this code is just a string at the end. And then you can see then it returns that string. And then this is where the write test really comes in. And you can see it creates a test case for that code. So the code is passed as a string. There's a focus parameter, which I'm not really sure what this does. And it generates test cases for the existing code, focusing on a specific area if required. So I guess that's an optional if you wanted to focus on a specific. So it seems like this, like if you want to test a specific use case, let's say you're not passing a certain parameter that should be passed, that can actually test it out. So that's even incredible on here. And then the last file on here that I'll talk about is this execute code, where it'll, so pretty much it'll write that, those functions or it'll write that code into a file. And then here, it'll just pass that file. And because it's a Python file, you can see right here that it runs a sub process where it just calls Python, and then it just has the path file name. And most of those path file names are being added into that workspace. So you can see here that it references the workspace folder that is defined. So if you want to change this up and have it right in other files, you can do that. And you can also even probably modify this code so that if you're running this on a server with, let's say, folders or repositories of other code, it would be able, you could almost update this code and define those different repositories and actually have the AI autonomously go through those other repositories inside of each one of those codes and actually start fixing up files for you. So pretty incredible overall. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sure I missed some parts, so make sure you leave some comments below. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe, like, that obviously helps me out. And if you want to see me really dive into other sections about the code, feel free to message me or leave that comment below, and I'll be sure to do a further video. Hope you guys enjoyed it and have fun making autonomous AI agents. Feel free to share those as well. I would love to see them. Thank you.